The Gans, who descended from the stars' ships so enormous they obscured the sun, were unlike anything Earth had ever seen. Bringing cities into a state of terror and awe, their arrival was a sight of overpowering power rather than devastation. Authority without firing a shot, overthrowing governments, dismantling armies, and seized power, claiming to have arrived in peace. But their interpretation of peace put humanity in chains. The Gans had their civilization was characterized by domination, a hierarchy, strength, and intelligence. Harvesting resources and using people as slave labor, they saw humanity as a primitive species. Humans were separated into groups and given menial jobs that were only suitable for physical labor. Among their occupations were the chefs, a group that the Gans hardly acknowledged. For the Gans, food was an unworthy art form. They saw it as fuel devoid of creativity. Their food was created in labs to be nutrient-dense yet flavorless. They considered manual food preparation to be outdated and ineffective, but they accepted humanism. They had cooks in their ranks who prepared meals for the Gans with little supervision. One of these cooks, Marco, was a modest man in his 40s who had worked in a field as unimportant as the items they utilized. Before the invasion, he worked in a small-town diner. Now he was in a sterile kitchen, making food for the other former chefs, bakers, and lion made up Marco's crew, which included the very creatures that had stolen Earth's freedom. Cooks who used to be proud of what they did now labored in silence beneath the Guk's icy stare. At first, the work appeared to be innocuous, and the cooks received detailed instructions on how to prepare the items. The Guk's labs provided the recipes and specifications for the meals. The Gukshin had a little interest in the bland but useful products made to fit the aliens' particular biology. Cooks themselves treated them as instruments instead of threats. This contemptuous behavior would end up being their Prusso era. Marco's biggest error was that he had an eye for detail and saw things that others missed. After years of working in bustling restaurants, he's seen the Gans' reactions to specific Earth-grown components. They sneezed when they saw a pinch of chili powder in the air. A minor mishap involving garlic resulted in obvious agony, and the scent of cinnamon even made their... Although the alien eye's tears were slight, Marco saw it as a revelation that the Gans, for all of their abilities, were weak. And their sophisticated physiology wasn't designed to cope with the wide range of natural substances that people regularly eat without any problems could, in the correct situation, result in negative reactions in Marco. Marco didn't immediately discuss his views of these conquerors, but he was aware of the Gans would not put up with the slightest indication of defiance, since walls had ears. Beyond their contemptuous attitude of people, Gushan haughtiness also included an underestimation of Earth's durability, ability to adapt, but they were blind to the silent opposition as they ruthlessly enforced their control. Expanding among those they persecuted, with individuals like Marco appearing inconsequential, were watching, learning, and waiting, and the G found life in the kitchens boring. Rian insisted on efficiency, and any departure from the standard was severely penalized. But Marco and his group discovered methods to express themselves without using words, such as a raised eyebrow or a subtle gesture, lingering look. These tiny gestures of defiance kept them in touch, and they started exchanging whispers and observations. The cooks learned more about the Gans' weak points, such as turmeric, when no one was looking, small doses of nutmeg, which is well known for its therapeutic benefits in humans, appear to irritate aliens mildly. Even common salt and somewhat higher quantities caused dizziness. Their digestive processes, initially unintentional, these findings evolved into purposeful trials as Marco discovered that the cooks were pushing the boundaries of what the Gans could put up with. If these aliens carried a weapon, the Gans wouldn't suspect food. The one thing, viewed as irrelevant, may be used against them, creating a blind spot for Gan. Was their sense of superiority. They couldn't imagine that Marco, a mere cook, could be better than them. Realized that resistance might be achieved not by fighting or using weapons, but by using the ability and compassion of the people known as the Marcos. One of Marco's team members was at risk as a result of the cook's increasing awareness of the Gans' ignorance. Lena, a teenage pastry cook, was seen smuggling a tiny portion of Garian tech was taken away without knowing what would happen to her. The experience acted as a reminder that the Gans governed by terror and any act of disobedience potentially result in death, but rather than shattering their spirits, Lena's abduction made them more determined. Marco realized that the Gans would need to be patient with any scheme they came up with. Not only did they possess sophisticated monitoring systems and a profound distrust of humans, but they also have egos, and the cooks carried on with their duties, fitting in, obeying directions, and acting careless due to their inflated egos. Behind the scenes, they were obedient and recorded every response, weakness, and error made. Under the Gans' control, the cook stays gradually became weeks, and months. Marco got more skilled at concealing their goals and assumed the position of a leader, quietly directing his troops. He was adamant that they couldn't do it alone, and that whatever they intended to do needed to motivate others, to demonstrate to humanity that the Gans' disdain for us cooks was their downfall. They saw no way that even the smallest one could make a difference. Dangers in the reserved men and women who cooked, they were unaware of the minor modifications to the recipes. They didn't wonder why the cooks worked with such precision despite little changes meant to test their reactions. Knowing that their time was limited, Marco and his colleagues looked determined to master every dish. When the Gans took over the land, the seas, and the skies, they didn't control the human spirit in their rulers' soulless, sterile kitchens. For a reckoning, Marco's Earth cooks were making something considerably more powerful than food. He felt a feeling of duty after learning about the Guxian vulnerability. The little things, he and his HFYs revealed a potential weakness. But he was aware that they couldn't take a chance because the Gans were careful in keeping things under control, and knowing that any mistake would have dire repercussions. The notion of retaliating became more powerful in Marco's thoughts. Yet, he saw the necessity of meticulous preparation. The first stage was to be sure of their strategy if they were to use their understanding properly. Aimed to validate their understanding of the Guxian sensitivities to specific compounds, Mako and his group started with the little possibilities they had to explore. They worked with tiny devices to test their beliefs and uncover secrets, amounts so that when the Gans ate, the alterations were undetectable. Mako kept a tight eye on their conduct after a meal, searching for any clue that their food has caused discomfort. It took time, but every test moved them one step closer to benefits. Maros began recording whatever they learned about their adversary. He concealed the notes, only disclosing them to his team's most reliable members, who discovered which spices produced minor irritations and had the potential to eventually create more intense reactions. They started to spot trends and meticulously map out the Gans' vulnerabilities. Marco highlighted the value of concealment, understanding that the Gans' existence hinged on their not knowing what was difficult for them to persuade the other members of the team to act, some of whom were the Durans governed with an iron fist, and any act of defiance, and they were reluctant because they were afraid of the consequences if they were discovered. Might mean death, Marco spoke to each of them separately, understanding their fear, but also realizing the value of unity. Slowly, he started by reminding them of what humanity had lost and the part they could play in regaining their freedom. The Gans, who were renowned for their haughtiness, needed to foster unity and trust among the cooks. It was because of this haughtiness that gave Marco the notion that they should hold regular gatherings to commemorate their triumph and demonstrate their control over the planet. These magnificent celebrations demonstrated the Guxian wealth and power that Marco had discovered, felt these festivities offered a chance. If they could sneak into one of these gatherings, they could give a blow to the Gans' leadership that would make them less powerful on Earth. It was a bold and risky plan, yet Marco started planning with his team because he thought the risk was worth it. Find out how they may use their expertise to attack the Gans covertly. They found important components that may be utilized to interfere with the alien systems, with an emphasis on those that would work best when consumed in greater amounts. The intention was to incapacitate as many Gans as possible, in addition to causing discomfort. Because Marco's approach called for precision, the cooks had to make dishes that looked ordinary, yet were laced with calibrated dosages of the drugs they had discovered they used covertly, enhancing their technological approach to guarantee that the food appeared and tasted precisely how the Gans had anticipated. They also had to take into consideration the sophisticated Gushian technology that could identify any irregularities in Marco's years of experience in diet. As Marco's concept developed, the kitchen proved to be extremely helpful in helping him come up with ways to mask the modifications in the food. Contacted other people who were employed by the Gans because he understood that their efforts would not be successful unless only the cooks required accomplices who could help them by providing information, diverting the Gans' attention, and hiding their tracks while creating a nest of obscurity. Although it was a gradual and risky process, Marco recognized the value of the Gans' network of resistance. The Gans were ignorant that each person who joined their cause helped them get one step closer to their objective. The increasing opposition persisted in undervaluing people. They considered the chefs to be innocuous and paid little attention to them. Despite this disregard for their operations, Marco and his team were able to function with a certain amount of freedom. The cooks established a system of communication using subliminal cues and constant caution. Marco made sure that no one worked alone by using gestures to coordinate their efforts, highlighting the value of collaboration and trust as Marco and his family got closer to the next Gushian festival date. A week after the Gushian festival date, teams stepped up their preparations, testing and improving their strategies over time. Marco gave each member of the team particular tasks to complete in order to develop their recipes and make sure every aspect was timely. To reduce the chance of detection, the team divided the workload, and each member recognized the significance of their position. Of carrying out the plan perfectly, Marco was also ready for the potential failure. He was aware that there would be dire repercussions if the Gans found out about their scheme, so he was candid with his team about the hazards and created backup plans to make sure everyone was totally dedicated to the cause. Marco was aware that figuring out escape routes and hiding spots in case they were found was essential to their survival. The cook's ability to adjust and react swiftly to shifting conditions allowed them to operate under the Gans' close supervision, concealing their goals behind a facade of suspicion. Obey Marco urged his group to remain composed and not bring attention to themselves, so they continued as usual. Procedures that made sure the Gans didn't notice anything unusual about the success of their strategy hinged on their capacity to stay under the radar until the big celebration day. As they got closer, Marco experienced a mix of trepidation and resolve, since he realized they were taking a huge danger, but he also thought that the Gans had undervalued humanity and the significance of what they were doing. Marco was resolved to demonstrate to them the fortitude and resourcefulness they had disregarded, even though the cooks had prepared their baked goods for their arrival. With a well-thought-out plan and unwavering determination, they had prepared not only a dinner but also a message that would recall people. People? The celebration day arrived, marking a turning point for both the Gans and the idea that Earth was not theirs to conquer. For the Gans and the people they ruled over, it was an indication of their power. For Marco and his squad, their undisputed rule over Earth serves as a reminder of their place in the universe. Was the result of months of silent defiance and secret plotting. Everything hinged on their ability to carry out their strategy perfectly without giving the chefs away that they were assigned with, creating a sophisticated dinner that satisfied the Gushian palate. which was as bland and practical as Marco had made certain that each dish contained precisely the right amounts of the carefully selected ingredients. That would be innocuous to people, but disastrous to the Gans. The squad coordinated flawlessly, with each member concentrated on their designated duty, following recipe to the letter. But the Gans were unaware of the additions. Advanced sensors were essential to the strategy. Every little detail was important. Compounds and spices have been chosen not just for their effects, but also for their capacity to mix in with the algorithm. The Kukshan's naive faith in their technological supremacy caused them to ignore the subtleties in the flavors and textures of the food. Before human cooking, they viewed food as merely a source of subsistence and were unaware of the futility. This hubris was the exact gap Marco planned to exploit. The dish's depth of expertise and artistry were plated and sent to the banquet hall, where the Guxian commanders and senior officers convened. Every plate for the celebration was the same, created to allay Marco's suspicions, told his staff to remain calm and work as though this were just another lunch, regardless of how much was at stake. Guxian negligence and contempt for human feelings worked in their favor. The cooks were not visible to them at all. As the feast got underway, Marco and his group kept an eye on the outcomes from a different aspect of their power. Distance. A strategy was created to take action gradually so the Gans wouldn't recognize a right once that the substances will interact with their distinct biology in stages, resulting in a sequence of events that would intensify gradually. The initial indications were mild, and another person squirmed uneasily in her seat when the officer stopped in the middle of his statement and slowed down a little. Even if they were slight, the Gans' responses were just what Marco had expected. Those who were not used to experiencing bodily discomfort did not instantly attribute their symptoms to the food they consumed. Their discomfort with ambient elements or minor ailments without recognizing the underlying cause, which cost the chefs a lot of money. Time. Marco's computations had taken into consideration the physiology of the Guxian and the time that would be required for the compounds to achieve their maximum potency. The first reactions were only the impacts were more noticeable as the party went on. Guxian commanders started displaying overt symptoms of worry. Their actions grew slow. Their words trailed off. Their faces showed bewilderment and uncomfortable. Some attempted to remain composed so as not to appear weak in front of their peers, while others left that the banquet hall was once a private space where they could treat their escalating ailments. Even with the Gans' assured demeanor started to change into a scene of subtly chaotic pandemonium. Marco and his group remained in them. Their faces were deliberately neutral as they went about their work in the kitchen, avoiding eye contact and acting as though nothing was wrong. Every second that went by without discovery being discovered was a success for Marco, who maintained the stress was evident, but his crew was focused, aware that any mistake could ruin everything they had fought so hard to achieve. Trusting his guidance and the strategy they had painstakingly developed, the Gans' cutting-edge technology, frequently their sensors and medical equipment, were their greatest strength, but they also became their weakness. Intended to identify external threats, were unable to recognize the harm that Marco's compounds posed inside their own bodies. Utilized were made from natural materials that the Gans had not considered important enough to examine. As the effects of the food peaked, this oversight permitted the plan to proceed without any problems. As the situation in the banquet hall worsened, Gans' bodies fell apart, unable to comprehend the substances flowing through them. Cops became panicked. Their once unshakable commands were yelled, but the typical Guxian efficiency was lacking, and confidence was replaced with bewilderment and terror. The leadership was in chaos and unable to comprehend or regulate the situation. When the other compound guards and employees saw their superiors, the mayhem in the banquet hall extended to them. The Gans, who had always been in difficulty, were plunged into a condition of uncertainty, prided themselves on their order, and when they were unable to react as a unit, this breakdown was Marco had hoped that the strategy would focus on more than simply the food's physical consequences. Marco and his group undermined the Gans' trust and authority by using a diversion to start their getaway, because they knew the Gains would ultimately discover where the attack came from and turn there when they realized how important it was to pay attention to the kitchens whenever possible. The team acted quickly, depending on their objective on the prearranged escape routes was not only to live, but also to guarantee the information they had acquired could be transferred to the larger human resistance. The meal was meant to serve as a representation of Guxian. Their control of Earth under supremacy underwent a sea change when the poisoning revealed weaknesses for the first time. Gans had admitted to questioning their sense of invulnerability. The cooks made the conquerors face the prospect that humanity was not as helpless as they had thought. Considered as unimportant, had struck a chord that reverberated much beyond the dinner hall's boundaries as Marco and his group vanished into the darkness. Their task was far from finished. They had delivered the initial blow, but even though the combat was just getting started, their acts had sent a message to more than just the Gains. But even in the face of tremendous force, humanity itself was able to resist, and the cooks had turned their abilities into a weapon, demonstrating that no contribution to the struggle for freedom was too minor. The consequences of the Guxian ranks officers who had eaten the feast spread it like wildfire. As the delayed effects of the contaminated food set in, their bodies became weak, and the upper command, which was formerly the pinnacle of control, was confused. The Gans' meticulously built facade of invincibility was suddenly crumbling as the situation descended into pandemonium. However, they looked vulnerable to the Gains for the first time since they arrived. Initially sluggish to respond, they initiated a vigorous inquiry and used their cutting-edge technologies to study the remnants of the feast, and they quickly discovered that the kitchen crew was the one sabotaging it. Marco's squad, who had hitherto operated in the shadows of the alien authority, suddenly found themselves in the focus of attention. Guards stormed in, facing the full weight of Gain's wrath after being deemed invisible. Every person involved in food preparation was rounded up by the kitchens, and the interrogation was harsh and relentless. Marco's voice was harsh with frustration and rage, as the Gains demanded answers, and his group had been ready for this possibility. They were aware of the dangers and had decided to keep quiet. Regardless of the price, every team member recognized that betrayal would have far-reaching effects. They accepted the Gaian sanctions without violating the Gains in order to defend the larger resistance. Several members of the group, infuriated by the cook's unwillingness to cooperate, publicly displayed their authority. The execution of the kitchen crew served as a stark warning to others that any act of disobedience will be punished with swift and ruthless punishment. Marco and his team's remaining members were despite their terrible circumstances. They discovered that their fates were uncertain. Comfort in the knowledge that their acts had sown the seeds of insurrection when word of the Guxian reaction and the banquet poisoning spread swiftly among the human community, despite the Guxians' attempt to use the catastrophe to instill terror. The opposite result was achieved. For the first time, those who'd been oppressed and discouraged for a long time recognized the cook's deeds as a beacon of hope, recognized that the Gains were not invincible, and that resistance was a real physical thing rather than just an ideal. Because of the cook's courage, human beings began to sabotage Guxian operations in little pockets of resistance. Subtle ways that Machinery M operated, taking influence from Marco's staff schedules, were thrown off. Supplies disappeared, and these small deeds started the poisoning had damaged their trust, which was used to erode the Guxian efficiency, and paranoia spread among the Guxian leadership as a result of the ripple repercussions of that moment. As officials questioned one another's competency in the poisoning, the cohesive command structure started to disintegrate, showed their oversight's flaw, and nobody wanted to accept blame. Therefore, trust grew within their ranks, diminishing their capacity to uphold order, the very conceit that had enabled them to ignore the human. Even in captivity, the cook's abilities suddenly worked against them. Symbol of resistance, their identities were secretly discussed among people, and their tales were told as evidence of what could be accomplished with bravery and resourcefulness. Marco, while being imprisoned, became a leader of the movement. His others were motivated to rise against the Gains by the leadership and sacrifice, and each act of disobedience contributed to the rising tide of uprising. The Gains tried to use fear to regain control, but their attempts undoubtedly increased the resistance. Every penalty they meted out to the people made those who craved freedom, and as the Gans tightened their grip, humanity grew more cohesive. The Gans were finding it difficult to reverse the change in authority brought about by the Cook's activities. Marco and his group remained stubborn despite their incarceration because they were aware of what they were doing had ignited something much bigger than themselves, and despite the prospect of being put to death, they clung to the conviction that their sacrifice was worthwhile, since they had demonstrated to humanity that even the tiniest and most vulnerable one of them could resist the Gain's supreme strength despite their advanced technology, and they might not unstoppable. The opposition outside the Gurian jails became more powerful every day as people started to organize more coordinated attacks on strategic locations within the Gain's infrastructure. Factories were thwarted. Despite these actions, supply networks were destroyed and communication connections were disrupted. Limited in scope started to escalate, posing serious difficulties for Gains. Marco and his group, notwithstanding their separation, were conscious of the consequences of their conduct and observed the growing despair of the Guxian people. Even in captivity, they recognized that the tide was turning due to their unpredictable behavior, increased security, and filthy measures. The Gans had underestimated the humans and were starting to turn, and now they were suffering while the Guxian tried to keep the chefs under control. Sacrifice became more significant. They were no longer merely a bunch of people who had tainted a feast. They served as a testament to humanity's tenacity and inventiveness, and their tale was told all across the world, inspiring many others to join the battle as the Gans once. Unquestionable dominance now appeared despite the final cost of their defiance. Weak Marco and his team remained unwavering. They had struck a blow against an opponent who appeared to be unbeatable, something that many believed was impossible. Their deeds demonstrated that, despite being outclassed in power and technology, humanity had something the Gains possessed: a spirit that was unquenchable. They had started a series of events that would continue to transpire long after their passing. The Gains were once certain of the poisoning of their high command at the banquet was more than one act, and unchecked dominance was revealing it. Of rebellion, which was a fissure in their authority because they had misjudged humanity's resourcefulness, is currently ignoring the nuanced influence of creativity and knowledge. The repercussions of their negligence were intensifying quickly, and the resistance sparked by the Cook's courage started to develop into a powerful force. Humanity's response manifested in minor but intentional methods, by which small groups and individuals organized sabotage activities throughout the Guxian. Controlled transport routes were interrupted, communication links were cut off, and under Guxian rule, factories suffered from essential supplies that were rendered useless. Unidentified issues are reducing their output and slowing down manufacturing. What started out as sporadic acts of rebellion developed to link into a more extensive and coordinated campaign. The Cook's actions had evolved into a call to action for freedom. The Guxian reaction to the growing opposition was harsh, but it only exposed their weaknesses, making their reliance on control and fear less successful. Humans who had previously accepted subordination suddenly saw a way to be free. The Gains attempted to strengthen their hold by stepping up patrols, enforcing curfews, and disciplining those despite their brutality. These actions did little to stop the rising tide of resistance if they were accused of rebelling. Anything they did strengthened people's resolve, and the Cook's inventiveness became a key component of the resistance's plan. Marco's group demonstrated that the Gans' biggest flaw was its incapacity to comprehend the subtleties of human. The natural substances utilized to interrupt the feast served as the basis for additional strategies developed by scientists. And resistance chemists started exploring with Earth's natural resources, developing fresh techniques to take use of the Guxian physiological weaknesses that were discovered and disseminated over underground networks. Spreading quickly throughout the human population, farmers started growing foods that might help them fight endeavors to cultivate weapons. Great ingredients, engineers collaborated with chemists to create efficient methods of delivering these substances, whether by food, air, or water, the GANs. Despite having better technology, they were unable to foresee these novel strategies, and the effect they would have on the Guxian troops were so powerful that their once unbreakable hold on Earth started to high-level commanders became suspicious as a result of deteriorating trust in their subordinates and the people they depended on. Internal labor disputes emerged when Guxian leaders held each other accountable for it. It was even more difficult for them to adequately respond to the resistance because of the increasing failures caused by this internal discord. The resistance's momentum had turned their pride, which had once been their greatest strength, into their biggest weakness. Kept constructing what had begun as minor acts of rebellion and developed into well-planned assaults by human fighters, targeted important infrastructure, causing harm to the majority of GAN's warehouses. Each strike undermined the storage of essential supplies and rendered important machinery unworkable. Guxian control over the world is making them disperse their forces more and more, and they are unable to adjust to the humans' unconventional tactics made their situation more and more precarious. The tipping point was reached when the opposition initiated a daring, extensive operation utilizing the insights from Marco's collaboration. They devised a strategy to severely impair the Guxian life support systems. The strategy called for focusing on the substances that the GANs depended on for oxygenation and nutrition, substituting them with Earth-based substitutes that their bodies were unable to withstand the resistance. So they used their network to sneak inside Kexian facilities and deliver the substances straight into their systems, and the operation was a huge success. Guxian soldiers were positioned at key city systems started to fail due to the effects of the man-made substances, and panic broke out across their ranks as the Guxian leadership rendered entire regiments incapable of their forces. Already undermined by suspicion and infighting, were unable to mount a successful defense. Overextended, and their sophisticated technology was ineffective against the resistance's inventiveness. As the Wen Guxian rule collapsed, humanity grabbed the chance to recover their independence. Encouraged by their victories, resistance fighters made concerted attacks to push the GANs out of important cities that had previously served as bases of alien authority, were gradually freed by humans. Although despite being technologically inferior, they outmaneuvered by using their newfound tactics and knowledge of the terrain. When the GANs, their oppressors, realized they could no longer hold power, they started to withdraw their once powerful fleet, which had arrived with the Earth's skies clouded, now left in chaos, leaving behind only a semblance of their previous might. Humanity had not only survived, but had exterminated a species that had thought of itself as unbeatable. The Cook's acts, although minor, had triggered a series of events that eventually resulted in the liberation of Earth, and the fallout from the Guxian withdrawal was during this period of reconstruction and introspection. The people who had battled for their liberation paid tribute to those who had given their lives. Statues honoring Marco and his colleagues were erected as part of the cause. The Cook story became part of Earth's history, and their legacy was preserved as a testament to their bravery and inventiveness. Reminder of the value of resisting injustice and the strength of resiliency humanity arose from. The experience of fighting the GANs had made the ordeal stronger and more cohesive, altered their perception of who they were and what they could do, and the world banded together to rebuild using the wounds of the Guxian colonization in order to build a future based on collaboration and a common goal. Persisted, but they reminded us that humanity was capable of defeating the GANs. Even though they were defeated and left a legacy of their own, their inability to recognize humanity's advantages turned into a warning to their kind. They discovered too late that power, constructed with conceit and undervaluation, was bound to disappoint the cooks, whose once seemingly inconsequential. Their knowledge, skill, and perseverance changed the course of history. The tale of the chefs and their rebellion against the gains became a source of hope for everyone, not just those on Earth. Not just those on Earth. Nevertheless, it served as evidence that even the tiniest acts of defiance could spark a revolution. Marco and his group demonstrated that there was always a way to fight back, regardless of how strong the oppressor was. Heritage persisted as a reminder that, when united and resolved, the human spirit may conquer the most difficult obstacles.